My dad only hires you because nobody else wants the job. You don't belong in this house." The words sliced through the air like a blade. 13-year-old Claire Coleman stood at the bottom of the marble staircase, arms crossed, eyes gleaming with defiance. The grand foyer of the mansion froze. A maid dropped the silver tray she was holding. The clang echoed like thunder. Guards stiffened. Servants stared at the floor, too terrified to breathe. Richard Coleman, billionaire hotel tycoon, shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing with shame. A man who controlled empires and governments stood powerless, unable to silence his own daughter. And in front of her, Maya Harris, the new tutor, a black woman in her early 30s, calm and composed, with eyes steady as stone. Everyone expected her to flinch, to shrink, to turn away like all the others who had quit before. But Maya didn't move. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Claire smirked, certain she had won, certain this would be nanny number 20, gone before the week was over. Then Maya stepped closer. Her voice was soft, but it carried the weight of iron. "You're right, Claire. I don't belong in this house. Not yet. But neither do you. Not as long as you hide behind anger instead of showing the brilliant young woman you really are." The words didn't just land, they detonated. The staff glanced up, stunned. Richard's eyes widened, caught between relief and disbelief. And for the first time in months, Claire's smirk cracked. Just a flicker, gone as quickly as it came. But the seed was planted. And in that frozen moment, one truth became clear. This woman was different. She wasn't here to run. She was here to stay. Richard Coleman sat alone in his study, the city skyline glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. Deals worth billions were stacked neatly on his desk. Contracts, stock reports, expansion plans for another luxury hotel opening in Dubai. All the things that usually gave him power, control, certainty. But tonight, none of it mattered. The echo of his daughter's words still haunted him. "You don't belong in this house." He hadn't been able to move, to defend Maya, to defend himself. For months, he had thrown everything money could buy at the problem. Psychologists, elite tutors, world-renowned behavioral specialists. One by one, they had walked out, some in tears, others in fury. 17 in total. And Claire had driven them all away. Richard leaned forward, pressing his forehead into his palms. The image of his late wife, Grace, flashed in his mind. The warmth of her laughter, the way she used to soften Claire's edges with a single touch. Grace had been the heart of their home. When she died, something inside Claire had snapped, and something inside Richard had gone cold. He worked longer hours, hiding in boardrooms and business trips, telling himself he was providing for his daughter. But deep down, he knew the truth. He had abandoned her in her grief, just as surely as death had taken her mother. Now the world saw him as the powerful billionaire. But here, in this quiet study, he was just a man terrified of losing the only family he had left. A soft knock broke the silence. Maya stepped into the room. She didn't sit. She didn't lower her eyes like the others always did. She simply looked at him, not with pity, not with fear, but with a steady presence that felt almost unbearable. "Mr. Coleman, your daughter isn't cruel. She's hurting. Every time she lashes out, she's asking the same question. Will anyone stay, or will everyone leave me too?" Richard swallowed hard, his throat tightening. What if I've already failed her? Maya's voice was calm, but sharp as truth. Then you stop failing her now, not as a billionaire, not as a client, as her father. For a moment, Richard couldn't breathe. He was used to being advised, negotiated with, obeyed. But this woman, a stranger in his house, someone his daughter had just tried to humiliate, spoke to him as if she saw straight through the armor. And the terrifying thing was, she was right. The next morning, the Coleman Mansion's private library had been transformed into a classroom. Sunlight poured through the tall, arched windows, illuminating shelves of leather-bound books worth more than most people's homes. The staff hovered nervously by the door, waiting to see how long this tutor would last. Claire was already seated, slouched in her chair with a notebook open, doodling black ink skulls along the margins. She didn't look up when Maya entered. "Good morning, Claire," Maya said, her voice even, unhurried. No response. Maya set her materials on the desk and pulled out a chair across from her. She didn't rush, didn't demand attention. She simply began. "Today I thought we'd start with literature. Your father mentioned you once liked poetry." That made Claire look up, her eyes narrowing. "I liked it when my mom read it to me. She's dead. Lesson over." The words were a dagger, sharp and deliberate. The staff by the door winced. Richard, who had insisted on watching from the corner of the room, felt his chest cave. But Maya didn't flinch. She leaned forward slightly, her tone calm, almost curious. "Then why do you still write it in your notebooks?" Claire's hand froze over her doodles. Her eyes widened for the briefest second before she slammed the notebook shut. "You went through my things?" she snapped, her voice rising. "I noticed," she corrected softly. "There's a difference." The room went silent. Claire stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "You're just like the rest of them, pretending you care when you're just here for the paycheck." Richard stepped forward instinctively, but Maya lifted a hand subtly. "Don't." Her eyes never left Claire's. "You're testing me," Maya said quietly. "You want to know if I'll walk out like everyone else. But here's the truth. I'm not leaving. Scream if you need to. Break every pencil in this room if that's what it takes. But I'll still be here tomorrow." Claire's lip curled into a sneer, but her hands trembled as she snatched up the notebook again. For just a heartbeat, her mask cracked, and Maya saw it. Fear. Not hatred, not cruelty. Fear of being abandoned again. She masked it quickly, rolling her eyes and muttering under her breath, "We'll see." But Maya smiled, just faintly, because that was all she needed, the first spark. The house was quiet that evening. Too quiet. Richard had retreated to his study again, pretending to read reports he couldn't even see. The staff tiptoed like ghosts, waiting for the next explosion. Maya found Claire in the music room. The grand piano stood in the center, black and gleaming, untouched for months. Dust clung to the keys like silence, too heavy to break. Claire sat on the bench, her hands resting limply in her lap, her eyes dark and distant. "I hear you used to play beautifully," Maya said gently, stepping into the room. Claire's jaw tightened. "That was before." Before. The word was a knife. Before her mother's laughter disappeared. Before the car crash shattered everything. Before grief turned her into the monster everyone whispered about. Richard didn't push. He simply sat beside her, leaving space, waiting. Then, without warning, Claire slammed her fists onto the keys. The sound exploded, a violent, discordant crash that echoed off the marble walls. She hit again, harder, each note clashing like thunder. Her voice rose with the noise, raw and broken. "Is this what you want? Perfect little Claire playing perfect little songs while Mom rots in the ground? Music died with her! Don't you get it?" The fury was volcanic. Her small hand smashed the ivory, tears streaming, her body shaking with grief disguised as rage. Richard rushed to the doorway, panic in his eyes. "Claire!" But Maya lifted her hand, never looking away from the girl. "Let her." Claire struck one final jarring chord and collapsed forward, sobbing into her arms. The sound faded, leaving only the echo of her cries. Maya placed a hand lightly on the piano lid, her voice calm but unyielding. "Music doesn't die, Claire. It waits. It waits until we're brave enough to hear it again." The words hung in the air, soft but thunderous. Claire's sobs slowed. She lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, her chest heaving. For the first time, her defiance cracked wide open, and all that remained was a grieving child. Richard stood frozen, tears burning in his own eyes. But it was Maya, steady, unafraid, unmovable, who reached into the fire and touched the wound no one else dared to face. And in that instant, something shifted. Not healed, not yet, but the first thread of trust had been woven. The next morning, Richard's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls, emails, alerts. He ignored the first dozen until Rebecca, his assistant, barged into the study, pale and trembling. "Sir, you need to see this." On her tablet, a video played. Claire, 6 months earlier, screaming in a classroom, flipping a desk, shoving a teacher hard enough that the man stumbled back against the wall. Her face twisted in rage, her voice cutting through like fire. "I hope you choke. I hope everyone leaves me, just like she did." The video ended with staff dragging her out as she thrashed and screamed. Now it was everywhere. Headlines flashed across the screen. "Heiress out of control. The billionaire's daughter from hell. Coleman fortune, broken family." Clips looped on every news channel. Commentators dissected Richard's parenting, his empire, his image as a polished businessman who couldn't even manage his own child. In the mansion, whispers spread like wildfire. Staff scrolled on their phones, shaking their heads. Some muttered that working here was a curse. Others predicted Maya wouldn't last another day. Claire stormed into the living room, her face red, fists clenched. "They're calling me a monster. Everyone at school saw it. They're laughing at me." Richard reached for her, but she shoved his hand away. "This is your fault. You only care about your hotels, not me." The words hit like a punch to his chest. Maya stepped forward, her voice steady. "Claire?" But Claire snapped, her scream echoing through the gilded room. "Don't you get it? Nobody wants me. Not my mom, not him, not you. Nobody." Silence. The staff froze. Richard's eyes filled with tears, but he couldn't speak. And Maya, standing in the middle of the storm, didn't look away. She moved closer, slowly, until her voice cut through the chaos like steel wrapped in velvet. "You're wrong." Claire blinked, startled. "I'm still here," Maya said. "The world can call you a monster. The headlines can say you're broken, but I know what I see. I see a girl who's screaming because she loved her mother so much she doesn't know what to do with the ache. And I'm not leaving you in it. Not now, not ever." The staff exchanged stunned looks. Richard's throat tightened, and for a split second, something flickered in Claire's eyes, disbelief fighting against the smallest spark of hope. But outside, The world was already sharpening its knives. That evening, the mansion boardroom, usually reserved for Richard's executives, was filled with different voices: lawyers, PR managers, advisors. The scandal had shaken not just the family, but the empire. "This is unsustainable," one advisor barked. "Investors are nervous. The board is calling for action." Richard sat at the head of the table, his jaw locked. He'd weathered financial crises, hostile takeovers, political storms, but this? His daughter's pain, broadcast to the world. He was drowning. And then the words came. "Sir, with respect," the PR manager said carefully, glancing toward Maya, "part of the problem is optics. A young black woman without elite credentials living inside the Coleman mansion attached to this scandal. It doesn't play well. The press will crucify you. Maybe it's time to reconsider her role." The air shifted. Maya, who had sat quietly at the far end of the table, lifted her head. Her gaze was steady, her voice calm, but it cut sharper than any accusation. "I'm not here for your investors. I'm not here for your headlines. I'm here for your daughter." The room froze. Richard's eyes flicked to her, torn between admiration and fear. The advisors exchanged glances, some shocked, others offended at her audacity. Maya leaned forward, her tone unwavering. "You can trade stocks. You can replace staff. You can build another hotel when one burns down. But Claire is not replaceable. She doesn't need another publicist. She doesn't need another cover story. She needs someone who refuses to run when she screams the loudest." Silence. One lawyer cleared his throat, irritated. "And what happens when this blows back on you, Ms. Harris, when your reputation is destroyed by association?" Her answer came like lightning. "Then let it burn, because her life is worth more than my reputation." The words landed like a bomb. Even Richard inhaled sharply, shaken. Around the table, some advisors muttered, others stared in stunned disbelief. But in the doorway, unseen until that moment, Claire had been listening. She stood in the shadows, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest, her face pale. She had heard it all. For the first time in months, someone had stood in the line of fire, not for money, not for image, but for her. And though she tried to mask it with a scoff as she turned away, her eyes betrayed her. Because deep down, beneath the anger and the armor, Claire felt something she hadn't in a long time. Hope. The auditorium was packed. Reporters lined the back with cameras ready, their lenses aimed like weapons. Parents from the academy whispered in the rows, waiting to see the billionaire's broken family put on display. At the front, the school board sat rigid, papers stacked, eyes sharpened with judgment. Richard Coleman adjusted his tie, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Beside him, Maya sat tall, calm, her presence a quiet fortress. And just a few seats away, Claire fidgeted with the snow globe she refused to let go of, the last relic of her mother. The chairwoman of the board cleared her throat. "Mr. Coleman, we're here to determine whether your daughter poses a danger to her peers and whether she can remain at Jefferson Academy. Multiple teachers have resigned, citing violent outbursts. The public has seen the video." Murmurs rippled through the room. Cameras flashed. Richard opened his mouth, but Maya placed a steady hand on his arm. "Not you," she whispered. "Her." Claire looked up, startled. Her father's face was pale, terrified. But Maya's gaze was steady. "This is your moment." The chairwoman's voice cut through the tension. "Claire Coleman, do you have anything to say for yourself?" The room leaned forward. Claire's throat burned. Her fingers gripped the snow globe until her knuckles whitened. She wanted to scream, to run, to vanish, but instead her voice came out small, broken, yet sharp enough to slice through the air. "You all call me a monster." Silence. She lifted the snow globe, the ballerina inside catching the light. "But I'm not a monster. I'm just a girl who lost her mom. And when she died, something inside me broke. I scream because it hurts too much to be quiet. I fight because I'm scared everyone will leave me too." Her voice cracked, tears spilling down her face. "You all saw the video, but you didn't see what came before it. The nights I cried myself to sleep, the mornings I wished I didn't wake up. Nobody cared, nobody listened." She turned her eyes to Maya, her words trembling but fierce. "Until her!" Gasps spread through the crowd. Richard pressed his fists to his lips, his body shaking. Claire's voice rose, trembling but defiant. "She didn't leave when I pushed her away. She didn't quit when I called her names. She stayed, and that's all I ever wanted. Someone to stay." The room was silent. No whispers, no judgment, no cameras clicking. Just the raw truth of a child finally heard. The chairwoman blinked rapidly, her composure cracking. Even Ms. Alvarez from Child Protective Services dabbed at her eyes. And for the first time, Richard saw it. Not the monster the world painted, not the heiress impossible to reach, just his daughter, fragile, brave, human. And the world, for one suspended moment, saw her, too. The headlines the next morning were different. Not heiress out of control, not Coleman family in crisis. Instead, the world woke up to, through tears, Claire Coleman speaks her truth. Not a monster, just a child who lost her mother. Clips of her trembling voice holding the snow globe flooded social media. Millions of strangers who had mocked her just days before now shared her words, calling her brave, calling her real. Inside the mansion, the air felt lighter, not fixed, but breathing again. Staff who once whispered behind closed doors now watched the girl with softer eyes. For the first time, Claire wasn't met with fear, but with quiet respect. At breakfast, Richard poured orange juice with shaky hands, trying not to cry when his daughter looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. "Dad," she said hesitantly, pushing her plate forward, "will you sit with us?" It was such a small thing, but Richard felt the weight of it. He sat. He stayed. Maya watched the exchange, her lips curving into the faintest smile. She knew the battle wasn't over. Grief never vanished, and the world never stopped judging. But a crack had opened in the walls Claire had built around herself, and through that crack, the light was finally spilling in. Later that week, Claire returned to Jefferson Academy. The halls buzzed with curiosity. Kids who once mocked her now hovered uncertainly at the edges. Some whispered, some stared. A younger girl, no more than 11, approached shyly. Her eyes were wet, her voice trembling. "My mom died too," she whispered. Claire froze. Her fingers brushed the snow globe tucked carefully in her backpack. For a heartbeat, she felt the old urge to sneer, to shove, to drive her away before it hurt. But instead, she took a breath. "Do you want to sit with me at lunch?" The girl nodded, and for the first time, Claire realized she wasn't just surviving her grief, she was learning how to turn it into connection. That night, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Richard found Maya in the garden where Grace once planted roses. His voice was low, but full of something he hadn't felt in months. Awe. "You didn't just save her. You saved me." She shook her head gently. "I didn't save anyone. I just stayed." Richard's eyes burned. Sometimes that's the only miracle we need. And in the hush of that garden, with Claire's laughter faintly echoing from the mansion windows, the Coleman family began to remember what it felt like to be whole again. The concert hall shimmered with golden light. Crystal chandeliers glowed above rows of velvet seats filled with parents, students, and reporters, all buzzing with curiosity. At center stage, a single grand piano waited, polished so perfectly it seemed to breathe under the spotlights. Claire stood backstage, her palms damp, her chest rising and falling too fast. Her snow globe, the one with the ballerina her mother had given her, rested inside her bag, tucked carefully against her heart. Tonight wasn't just about music. It was about proving she wasn't the monster the world had painted. Richard knelt beside her, his tie crooked, his face lined with pride and fear. He had faced investors, kings, presidents, but never had his hands shaken like this. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," he whispered. Claire looked past him, to Maya. Calm, steady, unflinching Maya. The woman who hadn't run. The woman who had absorbed every storm without breaking. "I am ready," Claire said softly. When her name was announced, the auditorium fell silent. Claire walked to the piano, each step echoing like a heartbeat. She sat, her small frame dwarfed by the instrument. For a moment her hands hovered uncertainly over the keys. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Will she fail? Will she break again? Then, the first note. Gentle, fragile. A melody that trembled at first, then grew. It wasn't perfect, not polished like the prodigy she once was, but it was raw, honest. Every note carried her grief, her longing, her love. The audience leaned forward, spellbound. Halfway through the piece, Claire's hand slowed, her breath caught. She looked toward the side of the stage, her eyes locking on Maya. A hush fell. "Come with me," Claire whispered into the microphone by the piano. Gasps spread through the hall. No one moved. Then Maya, startled but calm, walked to the stage. Claire slid slightly to the side on the bench, patting the seat next to her. The hall froze in disbelief. The billionaire's daughter asking her black tutor to play with her. Maya sat, her long fingers brushing the keys. Together they played. The melody deepened, richer, fuller, not flawless, but alive. It was no longer a performance. It was a confession, a reconciliation, a prayer set to music. Richard's eyes filled with tears. For the first time since Grace's death, he felt the weight of his family lifting, not erased, not forgotten, but carried together. When the final note faded, silence stretched through the hall. Then applause, thunderous, unstoppable applause. People rose to their feet, clapping until their hands stung, some wiping tears they didn't expect to shed. Claire turned to Maya, whispering, "Thank you for staying." Maya smiled softly, pressing her hand over Claire's, and she said, "I told you I wasn't going anywhere." Richard climbed onto the stage, unable to hold back. He embraced his daughter, then looked at Maya with a gratitude words couldn't contain. And in that moment, under the blaze of lights and the roar of applause, the world saw it too. This wasn't a broken family anymore. It was a new symphony. A father learning to love again, a daughter daring to hope again, and a woman once told she didn't belong, now the heartbeat of a home. The final image seared itself into every heart in the audience, into every lens recording. The three of them, together, framed by music, proof that love doesn't always come the way the world expects, but it always arrives when someone chooses to stay. Sometimes the person the world says doesn't belong is exactly the one who saves it.